conscious communication tenet number 3 for our conscious communication summer series. I feel like we should be playing jazz outside when I say that, but is...
We're bringing it home and rounding out the hat trick of hearing versus listening, which is number 1, reacting versus responding, which is number 2,
Yep.
and the final cornerstone of conscious communication is explaining versus expressing.
That one.
Right? What do we mean by that? Fundamentally, the difference between an explanation or explaining your feelings or thoughts to someone and expressing your thoughts or feelings to someone is a matter of focus. All of these things are a matter of focus. But fundamentally, in this example, it's the difference between explanation and expression is the focus on meaning, right? Where does our meaning come from? Our meaning comes from our emotional content. We can explain things in a rational way to people until our heads roll down the block, until night turns into day and we are exhausted, and still not effectively get them to understand our perspective, position, or why we are potentially so committed to a particular path of thinking and communicating. That's because explanation tends to be checklist, logical, rational, and lacking meaning for people. What makes people listen and understand and be willing to hang in there with you to work their way through misunderstandings is if they feel that what you're saying moves them and their emotional content. Right? So it's kind of like recognizing that like matches like. If we are speaking to someone with a deep understanding and connection to our own meaning about why it is that we're sharing and expressing what it is that we're trying to communicate, they are much more likely, whether they agree with it precisely or not, to give it time to impact them because it feels good to have your emotions moved. So if you're not speaking with a connection to your own emotional content, you're not going to shift people's feelings to inspire them to even hear you out completely, right? And to make sure that they understand the fulsome nature of what it is that you're trying to communicate and not just the logic. The ego does a funny thing with logic. It grabs a hold of it and twists it into all kinds of shapes if it's trying to win and be right. The problem with that dynamic is that in order for a person who's forcefully communicating, trying to explain why what they're saying is justified, the only way that they can win is if the other person loses, which ultimately makes the person walk away from that situation maybe with a temporary sense of victory, but as time passes between that instance and their recollection of it, they start to feel like they lost too. We've all been in that situation where it's like, well, I got my point across, but boy, I don't feel good about it. This is why we want to recognize the difference between explanation and expression. Expression has the content which holds all of the meaning as to why we're saying what we're saying. And the more consciously aware, intentional, and focused we are in understanding that meaning ourselves, the more effective we are at communicating to anyone, particularly through misunderstandings, to get our point across. Regardless of whether a person agrees or not, people respect and respond to clear meaning and convicted expression. In other words, when you believe what you're saying and you say it with meaning that sounds and expresses in a way that's valuable to you, you will be much more effective in how you communicate with anyone and everyone all the time. Excited to dive more into those ideas with you over the course of the summer.